thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much for filling the seats. Pretty much, yeah, that's very good, I think, ratio. And my name is Miks, and I'm really pleased to moderate this discussion today. And that's that, I think. It's called Manly Virtues. And why are we here? Why do we must talk about masculinity? Why do we talk about men when so many women are still not heard today? And why talk about masculinity when supposedly in Latvia everything seems to be pretty much fine? Discussion today is a part of a broader project called Stand Up, and it's organized by Centre Smarta, and we'll try to scrutinize and topicalize the man's perspective of gender-related issues in Latvian context today, and in a broader context, hopefully. I hope that this evening is not going to be too academic, but it's going to be educational, not too funny, yet fun. The goal for this evening, however, is to illuminate the differences and point out the similarities of what it means to be a man in various cultures in contemporary society. But in order to do that, we must compare. And to do that, we need a panel. So I would like the panel to introduce themselves to the audience for just one quick minute. Who are you? What do you do here in Latvia? And where are you from?
I think this is working now, okay, hopefully. I'm not good at microphones. But yeah, my name is Gareth Hamilton, and I'm assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Latvia. And I've lived here for a little while now. I come from Northern Ireland, but I think my kind of journey to Latvia has been somewhat all over the place. Though from Northern Ireland, I've lived in England for quite a long time. I lived in Austria and Germany, done field work in Germany, for example, as part of my PhD. So yeah, Latvia is kind of sort of the latest place that I have turned up. And actually, just at the University of Latvia, we've got a new project actually on sort of non-violence, and I think it kind of fits in a bit with this kind of theme of the current project that Marta has. And this kind of fun. So we were funded by the Latvian Council of Science. So yeah, we're kind of, as a department, quite interested in, we teach quite a lot about gender and questions, but in an anthropological way, which is quite comparative, as Miks was kind of saying. And so I think that's all I'm going to say for the time being. I shall pass on to my colleague.
Thank you very much. My name is Olle Jardbrink. I'm from Sweden. I came here to Latvia in February, so about 8-9 months ago, something like that. And I'm currently unemployed, at least officially. I'm freelancing as a writer and editor and translator between Swedish and English. Trying to make the ends meet, and don't know how much there is to say about me and otherwise. I came here to Latvia due to a very tried and tested cliche. I met a very wonderful girl, and I couldn't bear the thought of being without her. So I made the decision to leave my hometown and go to another country, which has been a cultural shock in many ways. But it's starting to turn up, and I'm hopeful for the future in a new country.
My name is Arnas Šličius. I'm a social work student from Lithuania. I've been probably the shortest of these people, only for 1 month. I'm doing Erasmus program exchange for practice. I only worked now with blind people, and me being a social work student is, I think, a big part of this discussion, because not only I'm learning what is to come for every one of not just female and male prospects, but the all countries around. I don't think there's a lot about me to say because I'm the youngest here, and I'm the only way I'm got here because evidently I'm a man. It's a big surprise, yeah. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot about me to say. So yeah.
Okay then. I'm going to provide a little example of my own experience, and I would like to the panel to relate to that. And if you have anything to add or a similar experience in your recent past or in childhood, you could share your thoughts on it. Did you know that there are 2 ways how to light a match in Latvia? Well, I had to learn it the hard way. It was in high school in 9th grade where we had a physics experiment. We had to light a candle, or was it an oil lamp or something? And I lit the candle very graciously, like this. And the teacher, he came to me and said, "You're doing it like a girl. You got to do it a bit more aggressive, and then it's going to be great." And he did it like this. Now, for 11 years, I light the matches the manly way. And this is just one of examples how culture actually guides our behavior through these little examples, through these encounters. So if you have anything similar, you can please briefly discuss that.
I don't really know how very similar it is, but I have so many times been told the same thing, that you're doing it like a girl, you do this because you're a girl. And most commonly, I think, is I still am in many ways, but I was a very emotional child, I think would be the diplomatic way of putting it. I cried a lot for very simple reasons, and I had teachers telling me that, "Why are you crying? Boys don't cry, and go climb a tree and fall out of it. You're not supposed to cry." And I've been told I'm a girl by friends. I threw up during a party just last year, and "No, what the fuck are you doing? Can't you hold your drink? Are you a fucking girl?" And that's even coming from a country that is, well, as all-inclusive and equal and feministic as Sweden is. Even there, I get to hear that I'm a girl because I have feelings that got hurt, or because I managed to, well, hit my head on something when I fell over. And I really do not know why that still exists in society.
I kind of have a similar story to the match. When I was in like 7th grade, there was a big popular thing to have long hair. And I grew out my hair really long to about here. And one week I went to visit my grandma that lives pretty far. When she saw me, she started laughing, and she said, "Why you have so long hair? You might get fleas." In the same week, when I went shopping with my mom, a person thought that I was a girl. And the next week, when I came visit my grandma again, I had my hair like this, only like this long. And after that, I haven't had my hair longer than like maybe 10 centimeters. Because not everyone, of course, looks good with long hair, but for me, it was more like, why you have such long hair? You look like a girl.
Yeah, I kind of think of sort of 2 kind of broad examples, but I think it's more I think they're quite comparative, though. Just in terms of kind of match-related things. I mean, I've never been a fan of matches personally myself, but I prefer cigarette lighters. But yeah, it's kind of the cigarettes are kind of the issue. And I remember at school, because I think that let's say it was seen as quite a good school, but everybody was doing quite naughty things, let's say, and we were taught how to smoke. Well, we all were kind of smoking, and then it was kind of worked out that there was a kind of female or feminine way of holding a cigarette, or a masculine way of holding a cigarette. So the female being through with the two fingers, or the man's would be like this, and it's something which I think was quite kind of, quite fascinating as a kind of. I mean, how I think actually that kind of becomes, I'm not going to use the term kind of like habitus, but anyway, the kind of question then, of course, it came to rise. Then it was like the school, I suppose, kind of formal dinner, and I thought to myself, I don't really care actually, this is kind of nonsense. And so I actually went and bought a cigarette holder and smoked away quite happily with it, and it was seen as quite cool. And I think that's the kind of thing. I mean, I think as well, when I went to university, there was a kind of fashion at the time as a bachelor's student to wear like little kind of tiny beady things around your. But I mean, those come from a shop for men, or like the man's department of a shop. So when my like silly aunt said, that looks like a girl, it's like, well, I don't really care. It comes from a man's shop. This is a question of you been quite old, not understanding what's standard these days. So, I mean, I think that this is a question in a way of people can be like this quite often about these kind of gender roles, but at the same time, maybe these boundaries are slightly fluid at times, and that's what I think. Or maybe it's just me being awkward, of course. Maybe that's just it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we should move forward to maybe more solid, more substantial things, and I would like to ask you to provide an example or kind of paint a picture of what would be a typical masculine traits or attributes you were kind of encouraged to follow in your childhood.
Yeah, I think this is quite complex, because I think a lot of these things depend upon things like class, levels of education, and that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever studied things like, there's a fantastic text, quite old now, I suppose, but it's still quite relevant, by Paul Willis, kind of a cultural studies ethnographer, it's called kind of Learning to Labour, and Miks will be reading that in one of his courses quite soon at the university. But anyway, how that, in fact, being educated was sometimes seen as being sissy. I think was the word that was used in Northern England. So I think it's quite a complicated kind of question of, there are certain things like you should be rough, you should be playing, you should be doing rough things, you should and be, I think, strong in terms of your what's the, not brave, I suppose, but kind of like be kind of sensible and not do silly things or whatever. There might be girly things, but then at the same time, I mean, certainly in Northern Ireland, there's certainly because it's still got a kind of divided education system on terms of educational ability and religion, actually, that it's seen as still quite as a good thing to be educated. So I think there's quite a lot of conflicting messages. To be good at school is good, but it's also bad. And that's one of the things I used to find quite kind of complicated. And for me, it was quite an interesting thing to negotiate, was how to be good at school and get the best in the year, not to show off, I'm saying that, but that makes you a kind of target for this kind of stuff. But at the same time, not to be some kind of swotty, because I mean, my father talks about his time at school, and he left when he was put into the top class at school, because he thought, this is not what men do, men don't study. So that day he was told he's going to class A, he left. And, that worries me. Does this still happen today to some extent? But anyway, sorry if I'm off topic there, but I think these things are all quite linked together.
I think, just like Gareth, that this is it's a very complex topic as such, but we have very much the same in Swedish. You're supposed to be brave and strong and big, and you're supposed to be brash, and I don't know if I can take it much further than that with Sweden, though, because it's been evolving very quickly since about the 70s. In Sweden, you're no longer supposed to be brave or strong to be competitive or to be the best and strongest. You're supposed to be brave and strong so that you can stand up for those weaker than yourself, to stand up for those who might need your help. You're encouraged from a very early age to be all-inclusive to everyone and to not look down on someone because of who they are or anything like that, but rather because of how they act. And as such, I think that Sweden differs a lot from most countries because it's not something I've ever heard anyone really say other than from, let's say, children's stories and such that have been written from a left-leaning perspective, whilst in Sweden this is seen as a very central perspective. It's something that all should strive for, and to be friendly and sensitive and caring about each other. It's not seen as a feminine thing, but actually more as a all-inclusive masculine thing.
For me, being a man in Lithuania means to be a provider of a family, for a family, to be not just a provider, but also be dependable. Of course, be strong in everything. That's a given now for being a man in Lithuania, because in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, all the Slavic region, and we're also mixed with the Nordic region. And when we all mix together, there's a very different culture for us. And for my father, being strong was to be close and emotionally. Don't say what you think about this situation. Keep it in yourself. The best way to have a good time is to go out for a drink with your friends and get drunk, because you had a very hard day working in construction. That was my role model, to be a man, to be strong, to be a provider, and to be dependable on others. That's, I think it's still around today in where I'm from, because when you go dating, even you're also always seen as someone, you're gonna pay the bill. It's almost a given, like when you go on a date, you have to have money. If you don't go. Yeah.
And when do you think you became a man? You know, there are certain rituals, you know, certain rites of passage in the various cultures around the world when young boys are kind of introduced to the manly world. And you know, in some cultures, it's when the boys start shaving or lose their virginity. So what do you think would be kind of a turning point for you when you yourself thought that I think I'm a grown-up now?
I think it was not just from one thing, but depend on a lot of things. First, like I said, shaving. Then, of course, having a smoke, having a beer, losing your virginity. Then after that, you think, yeah, I'm getting a job. I'm doing everything a man should be doing. That's, I think, when I think I'm a man. Of course, I'm just studying right now, even though I had a job. But still, I think myself as a man, even though I'm kind of in the progress of becoming more of a man, because I'm trying to expand myself.
And did you experience that other people started treating you differently? Or?
Of course. Before getting a job, you're more seen as a nuisance. You're not doing anything. When I finished school after 18, I had I was given a choice to go study or go to work. Of course, not being the smartest man, I went to work. And after getting to work, I was more seen as a man. Before that, I was seen like a teenager that doesn't know what to do.
I think for me it would depend on who you'd ask. If you'd ask my friends, I've got friends that would say that it's when you lost your virginity, or when you drank legally the first time in the pub, or when you got up on stage and sang the first time and at that gig, and that's stuff like, yeah, okay. If you ask my brother, it would be when I got my first job. If you ask my father, though, and myself, because I take a lot of input from him, I think it's when I first got my act together. I stopped fucking around and I actually got serious with my life. And I think I was 24 at that time.
What do you mean by serious?
Before this, I had quite a lot of psychological issues, and quite a lot of them brought on by drug use. And I was 24 when I was completely clean of everything. And at that point, straightened myself out. I got a different job at a place where I was in a better atmosphere. I started feeling okay for the first time in a long time.
I think it's worked. Yeah, I think the question, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I haven't quite decided that I haven't really kind of seen it as a thing that kind of happens. I mean, I think anthropologically, ethnographically, of course, what Miks is talking about is right. Of course, though, of course, there's an important differentiation to make between the question of ritual and ceremony. And one of the suggestions, and you can argue with it strongly today, I think, is that quite often things that men's maturity rights are active and female rights are passive. And the theoretical idea from this comes from that men have to be transitioned to new states, whereas women, it happens to them automatically, often via, let's say, producing blood in certain places. And that men don't do this. So I think that today, we actually probably in the West have very, very few quite formal rituals that do this transformation. But I mean, if you kind of listen to the examples from Lithuania, those are quite active choices, and there's a kind of thing of activity there. I mean, I don't think that it made much difference to me. People saw me whether I smoked or not, or whether I drank or not, or whatever. And I think that one of the things about academia is that you actually end up being like a child for a very long time, because you're kind of doing adult things, but at the same time having to spend quite a lot of time with young people. And you know, I mean, when I was given money by the UK university to look after these younger people, so you were spending time with them and doing the things along with them, which is quite weird actually. And you saw quite a lot of things you probably didn't want to see. But I think that probably this question of, yeah, for me, I don't really know. Maybe I'll actually, just when you mentioned ages, apparently that, you know, this idea of now when people become adults, what age it is. Apparently, in the UK, it's about 25 practically. I know lots of people who have moved back in with their parents at the age of 35 because they can't afford their own apartments or they've lost their jobs. So, you know, do you feel like do you transition back to being a child?
I think I'm going to turn the next question towards Gareth again, since you've been here the longest, and you could illuminate us with an anthropological perspective on the Latvian setting and what it means to what you have experienced as living here, and what you've observed. How does the Latvian masculinity look like to you?
So, one of the things that I anthropologically do is study consumption from time to time, and I've written about it. And for me, this is something that I spend quite a lot of time thinking about, right? And for me, for the last, let's say, period of my experience of Latvia, I've noticed that in some ways, that the kind of things that men can do in terms of their bodies has changed quite a lot. That I remember always kind of going to drogas at the start and being quite surprised at the lack of men's products. That if you wanted to like moisturize your face, there wasn't much of a choice. But go now and you can be quite nicely perfumed. Your beard can be lovely, shiny beard. And I've noticed as well this kind of expansion of the male kind of grooming sector, these barber shops. And I would love to do a study of male barbershops in Riga, because for me they're a fascinating construction of manhood. Because whether this is actually something real that's been constructed, I remember for the first time going to Wood Religion, and you get offered whiskey or beer, because these are men's drinks. Or I remember being quite shocked for the first time I saw. A few years ago, there was like this beer from Sesso called La Femme, and it was covered in like butterflies and a tiger. And I thought, yeah, it seems to be quite a lot of things are gendered, even though you don't really expect it. I think that men, in my experience, have the style of clothing has changed. There's I think much more kind of openness to color. I used to remark there was a kind of almost kind of men of a certain age wore this uniform of dark denim, and they had black coats, and they had those little kind of bags. And that seems to have kind of gone. In terms of other things, I always thought actually that kind of Latvian men, despite the fact they were still quite well, there seemed to be kind of an age difference in some ways. There was quite a lot of sportiness going on, and quite a lot of, this is all quite, we have to be act in certain ways. And then you think about it in a practical level. How do you convert from the fact you can now spend sometimes it used to take me 2 hours in the barber shop in Riga, because I thought it was like, this is really quite strict treatment, but because the UK you definitely wouldn't be there for that long. But there'd be men who would be getting all these fancy things done to them, but still, I didn't miss at the start, because I used to quite like, and not just me. I mean, you could, in the town I lived in the UK at the time, you could go quite easily and have yourself, you could have your back waxed, you could have your private regions waxed, you could go for hot stone massages in places only for men, and of course, that may be divided. I mean, you can get those things done in Latvia too, but you have to go to like maybe Kelowna or whatever at vast price. But so I've noticed that kind of change. But then again, I do think that this is a question of class, education, and different expectations. I do go out to the kind of like further, let's say. I don't really like the centre that much in some senses. I quite like to go and shop for groceries outside. And I think that you kind of walking down Blaumania or walking down kind of Tarbatis or whatever, you do see quite a lot of a different kind of behaviour compared to perhaps saying, let's say in kind of Portsiems or somewhere like that. And I just had one experience one day, and I thought to myself, I wonder why this is. I went to Rimi in Portsiems, and the checkout assistant, who was female, started to speak to me in English. I mean, now I only go to the self-service because I don't want to talk to people. But she said, "Hello," and I said, "Hello." She said, "I know you're not from here." And I thought, should I really ask why? And I just wondered whether it was a kind of question of deportment or dress, or in some senses maybe didn't fit into what she expected. But once again, is that gendered? Could be, but it could just be like, I don't know. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of, there's quite a bundle of things in terms of identity, and because identity, I mean, obviously is not something that just people just have themselves. They are identified from outside, and it's quite contingent. So I could say things about Latvian men, but then there's lots of other Latvian men who are quite different. So that's what I think for me is quite complicated. That you end up, I mean, I think ethnographically you kind of create a picture, but that detail is still quite important. Sorry for rambling on there a bit, but anyway.
And masculinity is something that, well, academically speaking, people do in various contexts, in various settings, and according to the resources available to them. So, and now you have pretty solid base of masculinity in general, you know, if you will. You've lived abroad in Germany and in Ireland and in Latvia. And how do you yourself adjust these masculinities in different contexts? If you actually experience that, or like, does the fact that you live in Latvia now kind of makes you behave in a certain way, or you've noticed changes in yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I always did wonder at the start whether it's a good idea to wear trousers of a certain sort and colour in certain places, because they were fashionable a few years ago. But yeah, I mean, I think that during my PhD fieldwork in Germany, I was in quite masculine environments, and I kind of found that okay. I mean, it's whether it's a sense of having to, you know, masculine yourself up is another question. But I think there is that kind of tradition in certain work environments where you have to be bantery, you have to speak in certain ways, and I mean, anthropologists are supposed to fit into situations, so you know, I find that slightly complicated, but it's not impossible, I suppose, to do, although it makes you feel uncomfortable at times. Yeah, I mean, when you say comparing and things, one other thing about Northern Ireland, I think was maybe I should mention it, was I think that that is a context, and certainly was a context, where masculinity was a very, very complex business. Because you mentioned earlier on about the whole question of not being feared and not crying. I mean, when there is debate over what happened in Northern Ireland, it's still not quite worked out yet, but certainly, I mean, for my early childhood, certainly, you were quite, I mean, you did hear shootings, and you did almost end up in, you know, not far from bombs or whatever, and you kind of had to worry sometimes about, you know, people you knew. I mean, I think it's still quite kind of class-based, because quite often, mostly, the people who were from a perhaps kind of working class, that's more kind of where these things came from, more kind of attacks on that kind of level. So I think that there's nothing that has been quite, I mean, I wonder what effect that has on people on a long-term basis, having that kind of level of worry. But I think that that situation, it was quite a masculine one, that you really, I mean, weren't probably allowed, or you should, or maybe you didn't want to be kind of like cowed, or you kind of had to kind of push on through. I mean, should you be scared when there's, you know, when you go into the toilets of the department store and there's a bag sitting unattended? What should you do? Like go, run away? I think it's kind of a sense in you, no, we're not going to react, this is the thing. So, I mean, for me, yeah, that was, I think, the strangest set of masculinities, because I mean, obviously there were quite a lot of female people involved in the conflict, victims, and let's say people who were active in doing the doing the things. I'll just call them that. I'm not going to call them any other word because it's too politically complicated. But yeah, then actually yeah, I think that for me, nothing else has been quite like that. And I still wonder to what extent that really created a sense of self, which is still quite. You probably end up being quite fragile in some ways, but you can't be seen to be fragile. And so, but I kind of get that feeling in Latvia too. It's not good to be fragile in Latvia. It's not good to be seen to be fragile. Probably not anywhere else either to some extent. But I think that I find Latvia to be quite. It's got a bit of an edge. There's a bit of a kind of not harshness, but there's a kind of, you know, maybe I'm just unlucky, but people keep on coming to talk to me, quite often drunk people, and the other day I was at a bus stop, and these two kind of like, I'm not quite sure whether they were on, they didn't smell of alcohol, but they were definitely on something like, And they were trying to talk to me about where I was from, and I kind of made up a story. I don't want to into the story with like those people. And of course, what topic did we end up talking about was football. And I mean, what other topic would you talk about? You wouldn't talk about, I don't know, butterflies or flowers or something. It ends up being something that men are kind of expected to do that. But at least, I suppose it should have been ice hockey, really, though, shouldn't it? But I mean, what do? Quite often, you kind of have to react to the situation, so you just sometimes get on with it. But yeah, so that wasn't a very good answer. But I think it's in a way that there are similarities, but there are kind of differences. But we are, I suppose, trained in life to kind of soldier, notice the maleness on in the terms of the language.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn to Olle, because you talked about Swedish masculinity and Nordic countries being, enjoying a high standard of equality and inclusiveness. And it is regarded as Sweden, Norway, Denmark as feminine countries in a way. What do you think of that? How does a country can be a feminine country? And do you even think in that categories at all when you come to Latvia in comparison?
Well, that's being quite aware. Yeah, I find the difference myself. I see the difference. And yeah, a country can be feminine if you subscribe to what is feminine and masculine in a general sense of gender norms. Then yeah, Sweden is, compared to, let's say, Japan, a very feminine country. Compared to America, it's a very feminine country. It doesn't have any aggressiveness or competitiveness in that case. It doesn't want more all the time. It's not as assertive in any way at all. It knows its place, and it's a calm country. It's a country that's very inclusive. It strives for consensus and not a divide. It strives as a country to make peace with both its inhabitants and with the world around it, and has for hundreds of years. And other than that, I mean, the most glaring thing I find at all is within Sweden itself. To find masculine things, or what is perceived as masculine things, I have to hang out with very drunk guys at bars. Then I come into this territory that is seen as masculine in the surrounding world. People start competing over bullshit, brash people shouting to each other from across the bar, threatening each other for absolutely no reason, but doing it because that's what their genes, I suppose, are telling them to, or their subconscious wants them to. In Sweden, it's not a problem because it feels like this is something that's still being pushed as some kind of a political agenda. We became a largely equal country in the 70s. Before that, really, but in the 70s was the last big push. And since then, it seems as if we're still trying to get the stragglers over to you don't need to act like this because you have no reason to. We aren't competitive by nature because we have no reason to be.
And now to the juicy stuff then. You said that you came to Latvia, for love, really. And you're not employed as a steady job, as a steady employer.
Yeah.
And your partner, she's the main breadwinner in your family right now. And knowing the context that you come from Sweden, from this equal paradise, how do you feel yourself like here in Latvia when you see what's going on? And do you even experience that?
Well, this is a country where I'm supposed to be the provider, the bread maker, the the one who makes the home happen, even if I don't necessarily take care of it. And seeing it from a Swedish perspective, in a younger generation that is very influenced by media we consume, that's from, well, as everyone else, it's American media. I would be seen as the same as I feel. I feel ashamed for this, that I am in a position where I'm in my mind at least, a liability. I'm standing between myself and my girlfriend. I'm standing between our life and our security. But I do not feel emasculated because of it. I feel ashamed because the man in me, the person in me, really wants to help us. I want to do what I can for our life. I want to bring in as much money as I can to make it easier for her more than anything else. Not because I'm supposed to, but because I want to.
I just want to say, oh, that's very cool.
That's, I don't know if it's called for really, because to me it's what I am supposed to do, not as a man, but as a person.
Thank you. And for Arnas, I wanted to ask you, because Latvia and Lithuania are, I would say at least, I think you probably have a deeper insight in that, are pretty similar in what it means to be a man. And I know that there is a noticeable shift in men's lifestyle media and pop culture in general, especially coming from the West. And then the masculinity is articulated going from machismo and chauvinism to more of a self-awareness and vulnerability and this holistic view and what it means to be a man today. And how do you think, how does that, and if at all, influence the public discourse in Lithuania, for example? And
Most definitely. Being from a family that's most had like Soviet family, because my father, when he was born in the Soviet Union, he was a soldier in the Soviet Union. His father, my other grandfather, also was in the Soviet Union, also in the army. They took every culture thing to me. And now, as I'm growing up, I have a lot of influence from the West. I think mostly movies, when I see kids playing with their dads when they're older. Because when I was 14, I haven't seen my dad probably for 2 years because he was abroad working. And I haven't seen him since because he, like I said, very fun with be around with friends to drink. Same goes with my grandparents. They still work. They're 70. My grandfather is 74 and he still works. He is of the mindset that I'm a provider because of the old thing. I have to be there. And I think this is kind of ruining most of our the previous generation. The most popular show in Lithuania right now, it's from 4 to 6 for 2 hours in 2 different channels. They show where they literally puts a camera in a situation of a Lithuanian crisis family, which is mostly between ages from 50 to 35. Mostly the age in the Soviet Union that now are mostly fathers. I think that's because it's very fun to see when people struggle for Lithuanians, because that's the only thing they get off to now. Seeing someone suffer because they crumbled under the pressure of the big pressure of being a provider, or because when you can't provide, you feel like nothing, and you start drinking, and you get into reality shows in Lithuania. I can't say how much popular it is. Probably, I don't know if it is in the Latvia, like shows that show crisis families Is there? I don't know the name, but I think there is probably.
Thanks. And I think a question to all of you, like briefly, you could answer knowing that there is this Western, I like the word Western influence, but well, and multiculturalism present also here in Riga. Do you think we're experiencing a birth of a new masculinity right now? And how is the concept of masculinity changing right now?
For me, I seen it changed a lot because my uncle now, he lived in America for a few years, and I think in that period where he lived, he was studying, he brought back a different view of the family. He has children that he's more involved with. Like, my father wasn't involved with me, and I see it with a lot of my friends. After you turn 11, 12, you don't see your father like outside playing with you. You just don't. Maybe they're just tired or they don't want to. With my uncle, he's always with his children, and he's not emotionally. He's more emotionally available to his wife and his children, because, like I said, my father is more closed, and the Western culture, I think, is more bringing the fact that you have to be more open to others, not to be closed in your emotions, to always have that I'm built up. And that's why I said, again, to the reality show, they break, and all the emotions that they had all built up break. So
the one thing you think would be opening up to emotions, is that correct?
I think it's one of the most important things. When he said a man has to be strong, like when you fall down when you're like 4 and you start crying, your mother comes up, why are you crying? You're a man, you have to be strong. And when you grow up, it just builds up into other things. You can't cry if you have been through a rough breakup. You can't cry to others. You have to maybe alone with yourself, but you can't do it to others.
A tiny example, for example, how do you think the masculinity is changing, and are we witnessing a new kind of form of it?
Well, how masculinity is changing, it's changing the same way that it has changed in, well, Scandinavia at large and in Netherlands and other such countries. It has to change, because if we're going to continue on living in, well, what we would call in regular speech a civilized society, we cannot keep separating the populations of the countries. We cannot keep on being women and men separated from each other by ourselves. We cannot say let half the population deal with all emotional things of a life and the other half of a population bottle everything up to be these stoic, strong figures of men, because then we end up in much of what he explained about Lithuania, where we end up with an older generation of men that will not be a part of their own families because they have never experienced it and they do not know how to. They end up distanced from everything that I, at least myself, would call the joy of life. Everything that they have strived to create, they cannot partake in because they do not know how.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that I've thought about this question before, kind of mentioned it, but the Lithuanian example. Yeah, what are the effects of the diaspora coming back? Because people do come back, and I think I quite agree that's quite an important thing. Yeah, and I think you kind of see, even if you look at things like adverts today in Latvia, there is this kind of picture of the man being involved with the family quite often, not as much as you might see elsewhere, but I think it's, as you know, a younger generation is sort of in charge of things probably will change because of that experience they have. There's one thing though, and I don't know, and I think this is complicated, and I'm trying to kind of say it in a certain way so it doesn't sound what it might sound like. I wonder whether the question of cultural imperialism will rise. Okay, I mean, I think you kind of get this notion amongst certain people, and I can kind of understand where it's coming from. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm saying I can see why they get angry at this idea of Western values causing havoc. It's something we're quite interested in our project. Where does this idea come from? And what is the notion behind this? And so I think that, I mean, one of the things I would say from the UK experience, because I know the UK best, being kind of like spent most of my life in that territorial kind of unity, that I think we kind of see today, I mean, obviously things have changed quite a lot since the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s today. I mean, men are expected to get involved more in childcare. You know, paternity leave, kind of Scandinavian style, has been brought in, though not, I think, as many men take it up as they might. The question, I think, is some people feel quite threatened by these new ideas, and I wonder what the effect of that might be on a longer term. Not that it should be a problem, but I think it's something that needs to be researched further, and what is the kind of background to this? Because I think we're seeing it in the UK too, and in the US about these. When there's that thing yesterday, I don't know if you saw it in the papers about that lady who had tweeted that her Navy son was was too scared to go out with women because he was too scared of sexual harassment accusations, whereas actually he didn't say it at all, and he was quite embarrassed by it. So, and I think probably that this is not one of these generational changey things, and I think that, I mean, isn't the CELIES supposed to be the youngest ever, the most number of females ever in the new, so that probably, I think over time you start to see these things and new ideas of masculinities that we don't even expect to arise, because sometimes you can't predict what things are going to happen. But I think Latvia is in a very, I mean, that effect of other things is quite strong, of outside influences, because we are in a globalized world. For better or for worse. But yeah, good.
And if you had to name just one thing that you think is the main kind of challenge right now for men around the world in Latvia, that would be seen as a challenging kind of thing to not necessarily endure, but the one thing you'd either look forward to, or like a one challenge to face.
I will reverse it and start with what to look forward to, because that's what I myself am more, familiar with, looking forward to things. But I think that one of the main things to look forward to is really what in my mind would be at least a society that works better as a unity. When everyone is free to express themselves and be themselves without being persecuted for just being themselves, but rather for what they do with their actions. When people can, without being afraid, just be who they were born to be, I think that society can only actually gain from that, and there's so much to lose for that not to happen. And the challenge that is behind it is, well, it's the challenge that is behind everything that comes with expressing anything. It's a very vocal and aggressive and brash minority that will meet you in the middle and make your life hell if you're not careful with how you express yourself or what you do.
It's my turn. Okay. For me, in particular, I think not just for everyone, is to be more open. I haven't cried probably since my grandmother died in 2008. It seems like not a manly thing to do. Like I said, be more open about your emotions, not be bottled up, not to explode. I think that's really hard for me in particular to do, but for every man to express how he feels, not just about, oh, this day sucks, but more of how I feel in particular in everything. For instance, my friend just went to a really bad breakup, and he never told her that he was really unhappy that she was texting another guy. He was afraid to lose her, and he didn't say anything. He was just, I'll just keep it to myself. And there was a point, like just a few weeks ago, they broke up because he was drunk. He saw the guy texting again, and he lost it. He was so built up, he started shouting, "Why? Why are you not loving me and texting someone else?" And of course, they broke up because he shouted. Now he's the victim. Not the victim. She's the victim. But I think, like I said, he should have started more speak about his emotions from the start. And that's, I think, it's the biggest reason why every man crumbles, because he can't say what he feels.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sometimes, when I answering that question, I think we have to kind of be aware that there are lots of, issues that are facing people of both genders, but anyway, this thing about men, okay. I think that one of the interesting phenomenon, and not a good phenomenon, is this kind of like, sort of, it's apparent increase in kind of young male suicide. It's quite kind of, it's quite a worrying thing. One of the strange things, I just took Northern Ireland example, but I think it's kind of probably related to issues of the legacy of the even people hadn't experienced it. It's still quite high in Northern Ireland amongst young men, and I mean, I think that's a question of emotions again, not being able to talk about things. So I mean, Latvia. I mean, I think we shouldn't talk down Latvia as being some kind of awful, dreadful place where men are, because I think that these issues, I mean, I think men in lots of places have this kind of question of not feeling that they can talk to people, and these things have been problematized in the UK kind of media recently, and in soap operas, for example, talking about, giving people advice on what to do. For example, quite interesting storylines about kind of male rape, kind of male on male rape, or suicide, and how to cope with these kind of things. So, I think in general, one of the problems for young people has been since the financial crisis in Europe. There's been quite a lot of those problems of kind of wages going down, opportunities being blocked, not being able to afford things. But the media itself, social media too, gives us quite a strong impression of how we should live. And there are lots of male bloggers about how and all these kind of cool things that people do. And I just worry sometimes about the impression that that's for the future of how people are given quite strong prototypes that are actually not real prototypes. They're kind of constructed prototypes that people have to live up to. I think that in the future may well be something we'll have to think about, or maybe more realistic role models on that level.
And talking about role models, I am a huge Harry Potter fan. Emma Watson is just one of the greatest young actresses nowadays, and she's representing a great heroine on the TV screen, and also she's a advocate for women's rights in the public discourse, and blah blah blah. She's just an angel. And what do you think? Are there any men who are leading by example right now in the contemporary society that could actually be put on the same stage as Emma Watson, like for young boys to look up to who are now growing up? I know this is a difficult question. I have no role model right now. But that's why I'm sitting in this very egalitarian chair and asking questions.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's an incredibly difficult question to answer. It's because on the one hand, you can say almost everyone that's still a male public figure within that sphere of being, among actors, among artists, among musicians, because those who are public and prove to be on the other end of the spectrum have largely gone missing from the public eye. They've been shoved out of it, basically, since hasn't been publicly accepted in media to not be fully behind, well, all these social changes. In reality, it is. I would think, though, that for myself, I have in my life had one single role model, and that has been my older brother. And I think that I have, during large portions of my life, been trying to find an answer to that question that is more general. What is your role model? Who is your, this person you look up to and idolize? And no, I can't say anyone that it's my older brother.
And then if it's your older brother, what were the traits that you were looking up to?
His way of being so completely fine with who he is. He is so secure in himself and his thoughts and in what he does that anyone can challenge him on exactly anything, and it will not break him. It cannot break him because he is completely open with who he is and what he thinks and what he does. And even though he's so caring and so loving to even to homeless people he happens to run into at the bus. He never lets anything get to him in that way, but not because he's this stoic, impervious character, but because he deals with it immediately.
For me, I think for the public, when you look at the public, it's hard to find, like he said, a particular person to follow, to be something kind of a role model. For now, for me, it's actually, if you know, Chris Pratt. And why him in particular? It sounds kind of crazy, but the biggest reason is, I think it was in the Teen Choice Awards. He gave a speech about how the new generation is not being more religious. I'm not a religious person, but I believed everything he said, and he got a lot of backlash for it. And I think that's why he's a good role model, because he's not afraid to speak his mind on what he thinks. That's why I think a bit of why. And for me, particular, from when I was growing up, like I said, my father wasn't really involved. And what I took, mostly the masculine parts, was from my grandfather and all the men around me. But my biggest role model was my mother. I took mostly all of my things that I want to be from my mother, because she was a single mother raising 2 children. She had 2 jobs. She even has 2 jobs right now. And she's very hardworking. That's the biggest reason why I want to be a man, so I could show my mother, yeah, you did a good job. That's my biggest role model.
I think that sometimes being an anthropologist kind of makes us be slightly kind of, you kind of don't like to sometimes it kind of breaks things down. You kind of can't quite give a straight answer because you realise the complexity. I think in this case, I prefer negative examples. That there's certainly a certain president of a certain large country that we perhaps shouldn't be following, but I think it's quite interesting that he still does actually command quite a lot of respect from a lot of people, which is quite if you think about it, it seems illogical, but for them it seems logical. So I think that for me, I am slightly wary of the idea of these kind of role models, perhaps as famous people, because maybe it's just the experience we've had in the UK examples of these very famous people ending up being investigated for various crimes behind the scenes that they did in the 1970s and 80s. They weren't very pleasant at all. I think that what really, I think certainly the kind of women are often, almost better role models for men than men are, in terms of behaviour and in terms of sensibleness and kind of reasonableness. But I think that hopefully, as time goes on, I think we need a whole kind of collection of people that, I think society in general, that we should, famous people are okay in their own context, but it's people around us that we need, such as, brothers or whatever, fathers and mothers, etc. I think they're probably the most effective role models, and I think that families do need support. I think that, people do need to, it's probably not good to live in poverty. It's not good to live in those circumstances. So I think society needs to, and I think on a broader level needs to support people so that they actually become more able to be good role models, and society probably will work, people will be much more comfortable, and perhaps, that's an ongoing project, I think.
I think that's a very good sum up and a nice cherry on the top for the discussion, because we are kind of running out of time right now. And I think that we can move to the discussion part. If you do have questions or anything to add whatsoever. So there is going to be a microphone running around, and if you want to ask something, please do. If not, then I can just, I think there is one. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, oh, that's loud, sorry. Okay, I just wanted to say something, because in the beginning, I don't know who, but one of you said that you don't know or you don't understand why it's still a thing to say, oh, you're a sissy, or oh, you do that like a girl. And I think that's something which is nothing that should be surprising to us, because that's a habit which just was practiced over years and years and years, and it won't disappear without us doing anything. So I think the big challenge, especially men have, because they're in the powerful position, is to tell their friends, and I know that those things happen in friend groups everywhere. They basically happen on a daily basis. That I think we don't have the time to be afraid of fighting, of discussing, because that's just something which shouldn't be possible anymore. And even if you're in a group of friends you really, really like, and they say something like, oh, you're lighting the candle like a girl, you should say, hey, come on, that's stupid, stop saying that. And that's something very uncomfortable to do, but that's the only way those habits are gonna disappear. And so we're in charge of changing something, and of not wondering why is that possible, but we have to do something.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Well, I think that's very, very much the case. I don't think we should be. I think we shouldn't at all be scared of telling people this is not acceptable. I think that an environment that I go around and this is what we do. This has become a real kind of like, you have to be quite strict and say, sorry, this is not acceptable. But the problem, I think, and I wonder, it requires, I think, a bit of effort. Is what about when children don't know any better? How are we going to explain to them that this is unacceptable? And I think this requires a good amount of. I think I think this is something that does need to be changed. I think we need to be much more strict upon these matters, but it's not always easy to do, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's a very important point that you've made.
And I also think that there is this weird paradox when the people you are the closest with are sometimes the hardest to actually confront. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was I who said that, and I completely agree with you in everything that you said, that this is not in any way an acceptable way of behaving, and it should definitely be cracked down on much harder than it is. I'd just like to explain that I was speaking out of the perspective that Sweden is widely considered one of the most gender equal and gender neutral countries in the world, and still we're being called girls for behaving a certain way, or girls are being called tomboys and butch because they behave a certain kind of way, and it isn't acceptable in any way of behaving.
There's a really easy way to fix this. Of course, it's gonna sound easy, but it's kind of difficult. Of course, I just contradicted myself, but it's not the children's fault that they're speaking this. It's their parents. If you don't change yourself, you're gonna pass everything on to your child. If you don't change yourself who you are right now, the thing's gonna continue. If you're gonna say to your child, the child comes up to you and says, I lighted a fire wrongly. If you say, well, you should have done it in the first place, that of course is gonna continue forever. But if you say, you should have said, I light this because I know the only way. Thank you for teaching me this, but I don't think it's the right way. I just think it's just a different way. That's it. Not just because it's a manly way.
Just one last little comment about that. Yeah, I think that the example that Miks gave at the start about the matches. You see, today, I think in the UK, that would be a kind of straight complaint. I mean, it wouldn't be allowed today to speak to children like that and say such things. I mean, it's really kind of, it's just, we all kind of like laughed and were horrified at the time at such a thing. But I mean, today, there quite strong policies have been introduced in certain countries about, dealing with this kind of quite casual sexism, quite casual even racism. But people then, certain right wingers in the press, then say that the world has gone mad, and yeah. And it upsets me when they say things like that, because we definitely have to, as we've all said, that behaviour is just. It's bizarre in a sense to be so rude to people. Even at a politeness level, you wouldn't do it.
Hi. A few weeks ago, I read an article from a male author, and he was saying, so he was maybe, I guess, between 25, 35, and he said that he's really believing in gender equality and all these things, but he said nowadays he has the impression the society has new expectations on him. So on one side, he's still this thing that he must be a strong man and he has to earn the money and everything. On the other side, he has to show emotions, he has the right, but he has also to cry and all these female emotions. How would you judge these kind of new expectations from the society?
It sounds to me like what you're trying to say is that he feels that he has the expectations of the world to sort of make these two things come together into the same thing. And that is how I interpret it, at least. But then there's something to say to that, because what we would commonly describe as masculine aren't necessarily bad things. Being strong and assertive and competitive and brave and all these things, it's not inherently bad things. They're just being very misused in the term of being masculine. And it's the same thing with the feminine aspects, being in touch with your emotional side as such, being caring and loving and compassionate and open about this. It's not bad, not in any way at all. And for him to feel that it's very difficult for him to make these two things come together, I think that he himself doesn't really understand that he's overdoing both of those things.
I think if I can add something, I think it was, I personally thought that it was easier before because there was just one thing, just be strong and do everything you can to be strong. But now, plus, in addition to being strong, you also have to be emotional and also have to be a caring one. And is that correct?
Well, I'm speaking from, these were expectations before I was born, I should point out. But neutrality isn't easy. It takes time, for sure. And for me, it's taken, well, soon to be 30 years. And I'm still at a point where, there's points in my life where it's difficult to balance these things out. But not in a way that I would ever complain about it, because it doesn't bother me on such a fundamental level.
I think I'd say to somebody who kind of like wrote that, I would say, well, yeah, and I mean, the world's full of things you have to do, and I mean, like kind of being a bit emotional is not like a great like exhortation. It's like just. I mean, who decided in the first place that you weren't supposed to be emotional? And that's kind of like, I mean, if you read, I just at the minute, it just reminds me at the minute of, the First World War kind of war poets who were writing quite emotional, quite angry poems about the life in the trenches. These kind of English and German writers. I mean, they were fighting a war, but were writing poetry. I mean, they didn't. I mean, they were cross about the war, but they got on with it. I mean, this whole idea of kind of, I don't know, I think things have changed, and we should be just like being nice humans and not just seeing ourselves, oh no, I'm a man, I must be doing this.
I don't really think there's much more to add, just that when actually more like you have to find a balance. And when you try to find a balance, you don't have to get like two masks. The one mask, oh, I'm alpha male, I'm lift, everything. And another mask, when you're with your significant other and you're like more loving. You have to find a balance, but I think for this generation, for all of us, it's really hard. Because going from one thing to another, it's not easy. The transition is, of course, always difficult.
In relation to this question before and the topic of complex or complexity, do you think that language-wise, if we would change something of this separated language between female and male, it could be a solution, or it could be make it more complex for, if we take this example from before, for this kind of male person or female person to solve this complexity?
I can only say, working with language, I can only speak from that perspective, and it's not me trying to sort of show off with that, but rather that it would make it even more complex, because we would have to set language evolution back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and to redefine things. And that, I think, would just detract from the issue at hand rather than helping to solve it. I think it would just create more problems and more division.
I saw an example in a text recently, and for me it was quite a complicated situation, because one of the things that's happened in the English language since maybe like the last 30 years is that actually some female forms have dropped out. So you don't talk about actresses anymore, you talk about actors, whether that's the word. But you could argue, of course, I mean, that's a problem. Why is it the male one that gets chosen? Anyway, I mean, French has had this issue as well about things like kind of Madame le Président or whatever. But I think that in a sense, this example was that somebody had used this example in a female version of a word to try and, to kind of show this person was a female. And I thought, I wonder whether that's really acceptable these days or not. I mean, I think that this question of sometimes titles gets round it. The question of, Ms. Some people just dislike that intensely, even though it's supposed to be helpful. Or having MX, or there's quite a lot of female PhDs who get around the gender thing by going doctor. I think that this question of what do you do in a language like Latvian, for example, which has heavy grammatical gender as well as actual gender. I think that's quite. I imagine there'll be some kind of academicians from language academies spending quite a long time trying to work it out. But it's a really, really interesting question about how what the effects of language is, because it's really, really it can have a lot of effect upon people and their expectations.
I can actually give an example as well. A couple of years ago, Sweden tried to, or actually did implement a new gender pronoun. Our main difference is one letter. When you say she, you say hon. When you say he, you say han. And we implemented hen, so as to not assign a gender without knowing, which I can say that if it had been used like that, it would have been a good idea, if assuming neutrality. But it was instead implemented in a way that was, it sort of went above its station in language terms. It dropped hon and han, or he and she, out of all context. All of a sudden you were reading newspapers where, even though with names and other terms like male and female, they were very clear about what they were talking about. They were talking about a male named such and such, but as soon as they referred to him, instead they were referring to, well, it, basically. And it has since then, it's been 2 or 3 years, I think. Since then it has largely dropped out of use. And even the people who are really gunning for it to become a thing, to become a legislation, they have stopped using it themselves, largely, because I don't know why. Maybe they realized that it just wasn't working like they wanted it to. It wasn't all-inclusive. It became divisive instead.
To give an example from English practice these days, it's not done everywhere, but there's, student organizations, for example, are quite keen on this, that you can choose your own pronoun and you're asked. So, there was a case recently, I think at a conference, or did I imagine this? I've been to so many conferences recently, but you actually could choose or did I just see it somewhere on TV? No, I don't think it was that conference, but they had you wrote on your thing what your pronoun was, so there's really no excuse. And there's been people taking, school teachers again, actually quite often, and there's, I think, where children are allowed to decide, and cases where they've been called the wrong pronoun. in English, sometimes they gets round these kind of problems if you're not quite sure. But I think it's hard to know somebody's pronoun if you don't have it written in front of you personally. So the press, you know, there's no real example. People have tried to bring in such a pronoun in English, you know, but it doesn't always work that well. But it's, you know, but language always evolves, and funny, and sometimes in very, very surprising ways. I mean, when you see this kind of him and her, him stroke her, I always like to have they, because it kind of like is much, much more neutral if you don't know who you're talking about.
Do we have more questions? Yes, there is a question.
I'm Portuguese, middle child of 2 brothers, and my father is the one who does the cooking at home. He also goes shopping. We call shopping doing manly things, and like we call licking like vitrines. So it's like walking around shopping and seeing clothes and everything. Like that's manly things. And my mother doesn't have a lot of tasks around the house since she works more because she's a teacher. So she has to correct all the papers, that sort of thing. And us, the three brothers, siblings, have to do the chores and organize between us the rest of the things, other than the cooking and going shopping. What my father talked this summer actually was about how, for example, me will decide whether I'll make a change in the roles of, for example, my partners and the people I have contact with in men or not, because it's up to women as well to change the role in men. For example, when I have a boyfriend right now, and when I am in his house, his family is not as open-minded as mine. Like, I've never met another Portuguese family, at least, that has the same rule system as my house. And when I'm in his house, I'm expected to act differently than I'm used to acting. But I don't do it because I just can't step back that way. So, for example, when the meal is over, I'm supposed to leave the table, like the plates, and like help to clean up. That sort of thing, because I'm a woman. What I try to do, for example, is like, I feel like I should help because my parents taught me to help when I'm a guest. But can you please, my boyfriend, help me, like do this with me so I can feel better, feel at ease with my principles. And he does it. But like, the thing is, it's up to women as well to try and make change in how we accept or not. Like, I have friends that, for example, don't drink alcohol in front of the boyfriend's families, that sort of thing. And yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
I think that notion of shopping as being a female thing is quite interesting. I mean, I used to, when I was a student and before, used to work in a supermarket, and I used to notice that quite often men and women would come together. Kind of women would come on their own, but you'd also get men go to do the shopping on their own because, well, it was just to do. I think that certainly since in the British example of female employment increased a lot from the 60s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., that men, I mean, especially as part-time work took place, especially shift work, that men had to cook, men had to do shopping because the woman wasn't there, and they couldn't survive without the woman's wage. So, I mean, I can see that, and you can kind of hear stories people saying about, yeah, I just told my husband he had to do it. This had to be done. There's no other choice. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, I certainly agree that these, I mean, I think in a partnership anyway, there should be quite a good amount of dialogue between things. And I think that, yeah, let's just say, if I was being forced to go and do, you know, I was being, whatever gender I was, and I was just kind of like being left to do certain tasks, I'd be fair quickly saying, come on, you, get some, you know, help out or whatever. The same way you would expect to help out, you know, with babies crying in the night, or expected, you know, I mean, I think we have to kind of like get past these, because if you know, I agree with what you're saying. I just think it's a really, really good example. This kind of provisioning thing is a brilliant example.
Yeah, if you have anything to add.
I would like more of an example. When I came here for practice, the first day I met like a guy who works with blind people. He is more like a trainer. And I said to him that I'm a social worker. And he looked at me and said, social worker, that's a woman's job. That it's true, because in Lithuania, all the places I've been into practice in, 90, maybe 95%, all women. So if not just the women have to change, but also the men. For me, working as a social worker, in Lithuania, it's seen like a barrier. Like I have to break it, I'm gonna be more like a feminine, because I'm working a social work with only women. So I think men should also change, not just women.
Hey, I got another question concerning the responsibility of media and advertisement, because like if you're working through Riga or in general, you always see this kind of sexistic advertisement and just like young boys being pirates or superheroes and all the girls being princess of kind of that. And do you think like if there would be like special law concerning that, it would be possible to change society on this? Because like from my point of view, the responsibility of media and advertisement is really important, but what do you think about it?
I think we've been lucky in a kind of interesting way in our university department that we've had quite a lot of advertisers come and study anthropology, and I think it kind of opens eyes to the kind of possibilities that things can be done in lots of different ways. I think that's very, very helpful. So I feel positive that advertising, is probably getting more, let's say, more aware of such issues. For me, one of the things I think that even if laws don't take place, I mean, public pressure is quite a good thing. There are so many examples of companies doing strange or having adverts which kind of contain casual sexism. Wasn't there the one yesterday? Was it the day before of the hotel advert somewhere that had, it was the man was reading the financial newspaper and the woman kind of reading a coffee table book in bed, and that kind of stuff is so simple, but people are often not aware, I think, of they're doing it. So I think we should. Well, I mean, question of kind of should the media be free, freedom of speech, but I think that it often comes down to customers. That customers, I think the kind of sometimes these Twitter storms people talk about are awful, but it's a way sometimes for some companies to realize what their customers actually think, and so yeah, I think kind of sometimes the kind of who wants really to be seen as a company which supports sexism or supports casual racism or whatever. I think there was an example a few years ago in Italy that the new trains had 4 classes, and in the 3 better classes everybody was white, and in the bottom class there were then like some black families too, the cheapest and like the kind of 4th class you might call it, but it wasn't called that. That produced quite a reaction. This shouldn't be done. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm agnostic on the nature of laws, but certainly we need to tell companies and advertisers if we're not happy. I mean, they need to know this is not something that's not acceptable, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with Gareth very much in that. I think that media and companies, they have a moral obligation to do what's right in these ways and try to make their own businesses more inclusive, more gender neutral, if that's how you want to put it. But I think it would be quite dangerous to make it a legal obligation, because laws are misused all the time, and you're opening the way for very extreme censorship if you're going to go in and dictate with laws how you can make things look.
Well, thank you very much. And I think this is the part when I say thank you both to the audience. Questions, I think, were brilliant and illuminating. And thank you very much for showing up here and sharing your stories. I think, yeah, your background is really, really interesting, to say the least, actually. And I also want to thank the sponsors for getting this discussion materialize, really. And I want to thank Justine for making this evening so wonderfully well organized. And thank you very much for coming. Yeah.